Welcome to another edition of the SpinSheet Happy Hour. I'm Chris Charbonneau, and before we bring on Molly and our guest, we got to do our thank yous to Mount Gay, who's a sponsor of the SpinSheet Happy Hour. And as we usually do, we present the signature cocktail. I'm going to just kind of show it to you guys here. I want you to pay special attention to this particular brand of Mount Gay. It's called Navy Strength, and it's got a pretty high proof on it. But anyway, you can take a screenshot right now so you can keep this complicated recipe. But we're going to bring on our brand ambassador from Mount Gay, and she's going to make our drink.
My name is Lauren Trickett. I am the National Brand Ambassador for Cointreau and Mount Gay Rum. Today we're going to dive into something super special. This is Mount Gay Eclipse Navy Strength. This is a newer one for us, but the term Navy Strength has actually been around for a long time. When sailors first started traversing the globe to get out to those distant Caribbean islands, they couldn't exactly just take a selfie to prove that they were there. So bringing back a barrel of rum proved that they made it to those places. However, if that rum tipped over and soaked their gunpowder, they were in a bad situation. What they realized is if the rum was at a higher proof, say flammable, their gunpowder was safe. Hence the term Navy Strength. For the United States, our Navy Strength comes in at 57.1 ABV, so this is some high octane stuff. Today we're going to make a Paloma variation. Paloma is a classic cocktail that uses grapefruit. We're in January, which is a beautiful time for fresh citrus, especially where I am in Southern California. We have citrus everywhere. So we're going to start with 1 ounce of our Mount Gay Eclipse Navy Strength. Again, we're only using 1 ounce because 57.1 ABV is a lot. And then 3 ounces of a sparkling grapefruit soda. I'm going to give it a tiny pinch of kosher salt. Why are you putting salt in your cocktail, you ask? Good question. Salt really brings out those sweetness flavors. It's the same thing with cooking, why we would add salt to amplify a flavor. Give that a tiny little stir, and I have a nice little grapefruit slice to garnish. This is a simple cocktail, right? It's 2 parts, but not everything has to be complicated, especially when you're working with ingredients like Mount Gay that have no added sugar, no added coloring. All the work is actually already done for you in that bottle. Cheers, happy January, and enjoy your Paloma.
That's awesome. I mean, there you go, guys. 57. So 57%. That'll fire your cannon. Okay. Let's get Molly in here. Hey, Molly.
Hey, Sharb. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's great to have you back.
Did I hear that correctly? 57 proof?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
that sounds like it might take the enamel off your teeth.
I think so. Yeah. I don't think that's something you just put on the rocks. I think you want a mixer with that.
It's like a 5-in-1.
Yeah, totally. What are we talking about today, Molly?
We are asking questions of Mark Thornton, who is our I was going to say resident expert, but he's not a resident expert, but we like to claim him as our own. Yeah. Even though he's in the Great Lakes, but he's a sailor. He loves weather forecasting. He's taught He's taught us a lot about it in the past, and he's come back. So back by popular demand, we have Mark Thornton from Lake Erie Weather.
Awesome. Let's bring him on.
Hey guys.
Hi, Mark. Welcome back to the show. Happy New Year.
Yeah, same to you. Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
Are you guys drinking anything maybe slightly less, alcohol filled than that?
Yeah, I have a Sam Adams, and I'm drinking out of my special boat show mug that I got about 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago.
Wow.
From the Fleet Reserve.
That looks pretty, that looks heavy.
Yeah, it's a nice, great way to, get your beer all spiffed up. It's awesome.
That's a classic.
Very nice. And what are you having over there in Virginia, Sharp?
I am actually, I've got the Black Barrel Mount Gay on the rocks. I'm on this kick with them. I like it. No mixers.
Well, I do have some Mount Gay in the house, but I didn't have anything to mix it with. So I'm going off in a wild departure, something I've never done before on SpinSheet Happy Hour. But I got this little baby bottle of champagne at a baby shower, and I'm toasting to the new year.
Oh, that's awesome.
The
Well,
only champagne fluid in my house. So cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers and happy new
Just
year.
lift over your head, Mark.
Yeah. clink up in the middle.
Cling,
Yeah. All right, great. Well, Sharp, are you going to stay on screen here? Or are you gonna go back into the green room and let Mark and I take over?
I'm going to disappear, and we've got a nice crowd here, so I'll see you guys in a little while.
Well, good. If you have any questions, chime on in. You know where to find us. So, and also I'll say to anyone who's listening, feel free to interrupt us at any time with your questions. We will answer them sort of in the order that we get to them, or at the end. But we usually sort of address them as they come in. But Mark, we've had you on the show a couple of times now, and so I know all about your sailing history. But maybe you can give us, now that you've gone to the dark side, and you guys have a big powerboat, maybe you can just sort of tell us about your boating journey from beginning to where you are today.
Yeah, so we started sailing way back in the late 80s, on kind of small dinghy sailors, and then kind of transitioned over time. And then we sailed CNC 35 for a long time. And then last fall, the fall of 22, we decided it was time to transition to a trawler. Mm-hmm. And so we did that. And so we kind of spent this, the past summer kind of reorienting ourselves to a new life cycle or a new lifestyle. Yeah. And now we're planning some long range cruising up to, I don't know if you're familiar with the North Channel. It's kind of this very pretty waterway that's at the northern end of Georgian Bay at the top of Lake Huron. Uh-huh. We're going to try to go up there this summer for maybe 6 or 7 weeks, and then ultimately come down the lakes through the Erie Canal down to the Chesapeake, and then do the ICW for a few years.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to spending, lengthy periods on board.
Now, when you had your sailboat, and I know you had a couple of sailboats, the last one being the CNC, right? Did you do any racing, or were you guys cruising sailors, or were you a little of everything, day sailors?
Yeah, we day sailed and cruised our boat. And then all of my racing was, it was kind of the more beer can racing, nothing, super serious, was all done on other people's boats. Uh-huh.
And you did most of your cruising and sailing on the Great Lakes, right?
Right.
Okay. So
right. Mostly on Lake Erie.
Okay. Well, I'm fond of Lake Erie. My first sailing experiences were on Lake Erie. My dad's best friend had. It's funny because we didn't know it was a little boat at the time, or we didn't think of it as a little boat back in those days. But it was a Catalina 27, and we would go sailing with 5 kids and 4 adults on that boat. And I don't recall anyone ever thinking it wasn't enough boat. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
We had the best times of our life on that boat. So
yeah. So what part of Lake Erie was that?
Right out of the Erie Yacht Club in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah. That's a great place.
Yeah. Oh, it's a wonderful place. It still is. So tell us how you got into weather forecasting.
Well, I think like most people, you'd, and this goes obviously way back before the era of smartphones and weather apps and things like that. And so you'd listen to the marine forecast on the VHF radio, and then you'd go out for a day sail or, for an extended trip or something. And then the conditions that you ended up experiencing were like so different than what the forecast was. Sometimes, night and day difference. Yeah. And it was, so I sort of had this like background curiosity of like, what is going on here that, the marine forecast is so different much of the time. And I just stumbled upon an ad for a weather program at Penn State. an online weather program, and took that, and I was hooked. I just loved it. And that ended up being a 2-year program, and learned all sorts of stuff about severe weather forecasting and tropical forecasting and so forth, all just based upon just responding to a little ad in a magazine.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny how those things sort of appear when you're kind of looking for something to do, right? Because you were sort of thinking about retiring at the time, as I recall.
Yeah, well, and I had, my job, I was administrator at a law firm. And so it was a lot of, human resource and dealing with, attorneys every day, be, more than a little demanding. And so, learning about the science of weather forecasting was so dramatically different than, what I was doing for a living that I just found it very refreshing. It was a great outlet.
Yeah.
And then it kind of created this, it really sort of changed my life and changed my, world. And that's pretty much now what I'm retired now. And so I spend my spare time doing forecasting and seminars and stuff like that. It's been a great kind of hobby. It meshes well with the boating.
Yeah.
To, carry me into retirement here.
And the last time we talked to you, you were in your camper and you were down in Florida. You were reporting from the back of a truck or something, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what we do in the wintertime. In fact, we're headed to Florida next week for about 6 weeks or so.
Great. Well, good. Sounds like you guys have a nice little retirement life planned out
here. It's awesome.
So I'm going to ask you a question I don't think I've asked you before, but I had to wonder, you originally, when we first heard of you, it came through Cruisers University, our friends at Cruisers University, which for anyone who doesn't know Cruisers U, they run it during the boat shows, the fall boat show in particular. And I guess Tara from over at Cruisers University or somebody made an introduction to us because you were looking to do some webinars and things like that. And we said, sure, we'd love to talk to them. That sounds like something our readers would be interested in. But I wondered if people on the Chesapeake ever ask you or if there is a difference, in weather forecasting on the Great Lakes and weather forecasting on the Chesapeake Bay. Does anyone ever sort of question, like, how does this guy from the Great Lakes know about the Chesapeake? And maybe you could just tell us a little about the difference in the two weather systems, how you see it.
Right. Yeah. So, at its basic level, weather forecasting is weather forecasting. The dynamics and so forth, the science is pretty much the same. But then as you move from region to region, kind of the prevailing patterns and what you kind of have to think about can change pretty dramatically. So here in the Great Lakes, there are much larger bodies of water than the Chesapeake is, and so you kind of get more of large seas, high winds. We're a little bit more on the storm track, and so we see more passages of cold fronts, and so the weather changes can be a little more dramatic here in the Great Lakes. But then when you shift to the Chesapeake, you're moving much closer to the ocean. You're essentially adjoining the ocean, and that adds all sorts of nuances and complexities to the forecasting of tropical systems. Obviously don't occur in the Great Lakes, but they're a very prominent feature in the Chesapeake. And then you get that kind of complex interaction between the large ocean and then the bay and the ground surrounding the bay. And then you're quite a bit further south than the Great Lakes are, and so you're more in the severe weather track. And so there's the weather in the Chesapeake from a thunderstorm standpoint, is a lot more volatile than it is in the Great Lakes. Much more lightning, more thunderstorms, more incidents of hail, a higher presence of tornadoes, particularly in the southern bay, than there are here in the Great Lakes. And so it's, again, at the basic level, forecasting is forecasting. Mm-hmm. But there's fairly significant differences between, the bay and the Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm. So you do a lot of seminars through Cruisers University and for clubs, and I think you've done some for, or you have at least had private clients for certain sailboat races, such as the Chicago Mac. Do you have like 3 common questions that everyone always asks you?
Right. One of the big ones is, which is the best forecasting app, or which is the most accurate forecasting app? And this is, on one hand, it seems kind of like a simple question, but on the other hand, it's a little more complicated, because the thing to kind of remember is that the underlying data sources, whether you're talking about like Predict Wind or Sail Flow, or, there's a million apps out there, they're really using the same data sources, which are the, forecasting data files from the National Weather Service or the European Weather Service or something. And so really the major differences between the apps is how they display the data, because the underlying data is the same. So it's, for example, let's say that, one of the forecast models from the National Weather Service is the GFS, the Global Forecast System. So if you look at the GFS on Sail Flow, and then you go over to Predict Wind and also look at the GFS, you're looking at the same data, just on 2 different platforms. And so really, when it comes down to sort of picking a weather app, it's really about the interface. Like, do you like how the screens are displayed? And do you like the other features that are available and ways to, maybe manipulate the forecast or manipulate the window? Whether does it provide routing? So it's really kind of about the features that distinguish, one app from the next. Mm-hmm. Not so much whether one is more accurate than the other.
Now, can I ask you a sub question to that? Sure. Answer you just? What weather apps do you use?
I like Predict Wind. And one of the reasons I like Predict Wind is, like one of the things that you need to be cognizant of when you're doing your forecasting is that no forecast model is always accurate. It's kind of like, they're like people. Sometimes they're having a good day and sometimes they're having, a not so much good day. And so you need to compare, the different forecast models handle the mathematics of forecasting a little bit differently. And they do a little bit different way of kind of creating the initial conditions. And so then they can come up with, like wildly different solutions. And so on Predict Wind, you can bring up the GFS, and let's say it's, north at 30 on the bay, and the European model is showing south at 30 on the bay. That is that's a problem as a forecaster.
Yeah, and so, especially when you're trying to decide what direction to go.
Right. And so, one of the missions is you kind of have to decide, which one of those forecast models might be the most accurate one. And so Predict Wind allows you to look at those side by side and do the comparisons a lot easier than just looking at a single screen of data and then having to switch to just another screen and look at the data. Plus, obviously, Predict Wind has a whole bunch of other features. They've also been around a long time, so they're a very stable product and have good, customer support. I also like to use Expedition, kind of a fundamentally different program, way of ingesting weather data. And I use that for doing my routings. It has a very powerful weather routing algorithm in it. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of my top 2. For radar, I really like Radar Scope, really a full-featured radar program. I don't think you can do any better for a radar app than Radar Scope.
And you pay for Radar Scope, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an app, it's an iOS app, fairly inexpensive, maybe like $10 or something to buy the app. Mm-hmm. And then there's an annual subscription if you want the enhanced data. Mm-hmm. But I think it's only around $15 a year or something. Very modest.
Oh, okay.
Pricing, nothing too, extraordinary.
Yeah,
really good program.
Our readers are, or the listeners, I think, are mostly sailors, so they're cheap by definition. And so they like right. their free apps. But if you tell us it's a great and worth the investment and it's only $15 a year, well, that That's appealing.
That's
So,
right.
So you say that weather apps, very common question. Did you have a couple of other common questions that you get?
Yeah, that if, over time, so right now, the forecast models are, fairly accurate in the 2 to 3 day time frame, kind of moderately accurate in 4 to 5 days. And then accuracy really drops off after that. And so one of the common questions is like, well, will weather forecasting ever get to the point where it will be 100% accurate? And, forever is a long time. But in the near term, the answer is like probably not, because the dilemma with forecasting is that it's not very realistic to capture the current state of the atmosphere at every point on the planet simultaneously in order to create like the initial conditions. Like you can't do a forecast unless you know the starting point. Mm-hmm. And so there's all sorts of problems with creating the starting point, because their observation stations are pretty far away. There's vast parts of the ocean where there are no observations at all except from satellite. And so you kind of get this less than accurate starting point, and the accuracy can't increase from there. Mm-hmm. So things are still getting better. Increased computer power will make things more accurate over time. They're coming up with some very sophisticated ways of handling that and those initial conditions when they have it, that have made pretty dramatic improvements over the past few years. But there is a point where you kind of reach diminishing returns, where we'll never really get to 100% accuracy unless there's some kind of profound sea change in the way that the initial data is collected. Recent articles, actually, they're applying AI to this problem. So that'll be kind of interesting to see if that has any impact over the next 4 or 5 years.
Interesting. I know what I should have done is tee up the question, is it going to snow here on Saturday? That's really what's on everybody's mind,
Yeah.
Is it just going to rain, or is there going to be some sort of a snow event? And I haven't been to the grocery store, but I'm fairly certain that they're selling a lot of toilet paper for the very tiny chance that we might have a couple of snowflakes. And and it could just be a sleety morning leading into a rainy day. But I'm going to guess that there's no snow. My forecasting is just. I'm looking at my weather apps, thinking, it might snow a little in DC, but I doubt it. So you guys can make fun of me at the next SpinSheet Happy Hour if it does snow 5 inches on Saturday, because I doubt it. And by the way, Bob Dunn, hi Bob, thanks for tuning in. I see that he made a comment that he has used, and he likes Passage Weather. Weather. Are you familiar with Passage Weather, Mark?
Yeah, that's a sort of a web-based product. The underlying data is still the same as predict wind or sail flow, or even what Expedition ingests. So Passage Weather does a great job of how they display the data and usability and so forth.
Good. And Tim Mangus has a weather app suggestion too. So go ahead and pop your weather app suggestions in the comments. And I agree with you, Alicia, about the 50 proof rum is really good for the snow flurries, except they're going to happen in the morning. I don't know if you really want to start in the morning on the 50 proof rum. If you do, send pictures. Hi, Bill. I see that there's a comment. There's a question from Bill here. We'll just go ahead and address it before we move on. What's the best immediate app for when you are sailing and you see dark clouds moving east toward the bay?
Radar. Yeah, but back to, you kind of move from, there's a term called nowcasting versus forecasting. So forecasting is when you're planning a few hours or several days ahead of time. But once you're kind of in the event, you switch to what's called nowcasting, and radar is an excellent tool for that, because you can see how the storms are moving. Many radar apps will now actually, you can put in what's called a track, and so it will show you the projected motion of that storm. And you can even query, there'll be can be a little pop-up box on each little storm that will tell you the direction that storm is headed and how fast it's moving. And so you can start to get some sense of, how much time do you have until it reaches you? And is it actually headed directly at you, or, perhaps it'll go to the north or south? So radar is really the answer for, nowcasting thunderstorms.
Nowcasting, I like that. That's when you're sailing along, you look behind you and you go, oh.
And I probably should have added.
Roll them up, turn the engine on, let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, one more thing I should probably add is that, always monitor your VHF too, because when the Weather Service issues their watches and warnings, those are going to come across the VHF channel.
Mm-hmm.
So an important thing to listen to that. And look for a weather app, and Radar Scope happens to be one, that will actually pop the watches and warnings right up on your radar screen.
Okay, so if you don't have radar on your boat, as someone is writing, you could at least look at your Radar Scope app.
Right, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. You said there might be another common question that you get from your seminar attendees.
Yeah.
Sort of apps, will weather forecasting be perfect?
Yeah. Sort of like what? So why is forecasting so hard, or some sort of question along that? Why does it have to be so complicated? Is it's a question that comes out in sort of a variety of ways. And my answer is that I think that, in some respects, learning forecasting is sort of like starting a new sport, or maybe learning a language, although maybe that's not a good analogy. And so, you come in, there's all this jargon that you don't quite understand. There's these skills that you feel kind of, that you're having trouble accommodating. And my answer is that, really weather forecasting is not that difficult. None of each of the topics, at least from for understanding it as far as a recreational boater, is that none of the topics are very difficult. The challenge with forecasting is kind of keeping track of, there's a multitude of things that you kind of have to remember, little bits and pieces that are not difficult, individually, but kind of get a little more complex as you put them together. Mm-hmm. So just kind of take a deep breath and just jump in and start working on your forecasting and learn the tools. And you'll be surprised, at the end of the season, how much you'll have learned about weather forecasting. If you don't have kind of that, it's like some people have a mental block on mathematics, and then they can't learn mathematics because they sort of have a mental block.
Yeah.
And I run into a lot of people that have that kind of issue with, weather forecasting.
It's interesting to think that a bunch of sailors want weather forecasting to be easy, and is sailing a sport with a completely different language that can take you many, many years, if not an entire lifetime, to master. But they want weather forecasting to be easy.
Right. Precisely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and now would be a good time to mention, and we're going to give the details at the very end, but Mark is going to do Marine Weather Forecasting 101 for the Chesapeake in the month of March. And we'll put a link at the end of the program if you want to join us on that, or you can go to spinsheet.com and look on the calendar, and we have a link to that within our calendar right now. And you'll hear more about it between now and then. We'll have something in the magazine about it. If we don't already in the January issue, it will be in the February issue. We did have a question come in here. Hi, Shelley. Thanks for tuning in. What are some of the weather patterns you focus on when you're forecasting for thunderstorms?
Oh, good. Great question. In fact, my kind of generic answer of where any forecast should start is always with the large scale weather pattern. And so by this, I mean, where are the areas of high pressure? Where are the areas of low pressure? Does that low pressure system have a cold front and a warm front associated with it? Because you'll find out that, much of the time, not all of the time, but much of the time, the larger scale and more severe thunderstorm outbreaks are associated with the approach of a low pressure system, particularly the cold front of the low pressure system. Mm-hmm. So if you know that there's if you look at a surface weather map and you see there's a cold front coming, right away, a light bulb goes off in my head. This could be a thunderstorm day because there's a cold front coming. When it comes to the more pop-up thunderstorms, the thunderstorms that happen, late in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, and they happen with regularity, those are a lot more challenging to forecast because they tend to just rely upon maximum heating of the day. So when in July and August, when the conditions are kind of warm and sultry, you don't really need a warm front or a cold front in order to pop off a thunderstorm. But being aware that on very warm days where the conditions are very still, there's lots of solar heating, that you could get thunderstorms late in the afternoon can still be a help, but they're just a lot more difficult to know with any accuracy when or where they might pop up.
Yeah. Well, and I think that and sailors who live here long enough will, on some of those really hot summer days, you can sort of wake up, look out, look.
He's sort of, Ollie is frozen there. Oh. Charbay. Yeah, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Rookie mistake. Sorry. I'm waiting for her to become unfrozen.
Okay. I can expand on my answer a little bit while we wait for Molly to come back. But,
There she
I'm
is.
coming back. And now,
So,
do you?
so one thing to keep in mind on those, so if you've looked at a surface weather map and there isn't a cold front, coming or something, but it's kind of a hot, sultry day, it's not uncommon for those thunderstorms, right along the shore to be triggered by the sea breeze. So if you're out sailing and you notice there's a sea breeze, now that you've got a little bit higher chance that you could get the development of a thunderstorm, near the coast, because that sea breeze, while it provides, great wind for sailing, also acts sort of like a little miniature cold front, right near the bay, and you can get thunderstorms that way also.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit more about thunderstorms. You were on the show last year and you were.
I think we've lost Molly again. And Chris, you're still muted.
I'm here.
Oh, there's Molly. All right, we'll keep going.
Okay, we'll just keep going. I don't know when I cut out.
Something about starting to talk about thunderstorms or something.
Yeah, last year you were on the program along with David Flynn, and we were talking about the extreme weather event at the Chicago Mac, which I thought was pretty fascinating because you had to sort of drop a bomb there on your customer about what kind of a storm they were facing. I just thought that would be interesting for you to tell anyone who wasn't listening in on that particular program what you saw happening before the Chicago Mac.
Yeah, this may have been the most difficult forecast that I've had to share with clients. So for those that are unfamiliar, the Chicago Mac runs from Chicago up to Mackinac Island, up at the peak of Lake Huron, and there are about anywhere from 250 to 300 boats that race in that race. So there's a big pack of boats, heading up the lake, and race starts on Saturday morning. And as early as Wednesday, it was starting to look like Saturday was going to be a really volatile day. And it's sort of unusual for that sort of a forecast to come out 3 days ahead of time. And then on Thursday, they were continuing to suggest that Saturday was going to be really volatile, and then into Friday. And so, as each day progressed, it became, all the more certain that this event was going to, be pretty significant. And they were looking at sort of 2 rounds of a squall lines, 2 separate squall lines that were going to form in western Wisconsin, race across Wisconsin at 50, 60 knots, and then move across the lake. And then there would be a second one a couple hours later that would, follow in the wake of that. And with the timing of the race and the timing of the squall lines, this was going to happen late in the evening on Saturday and perhaps overnight into darkness, which, a thunderstorm on the water is always pretty scary. But at night, when you can't see anything coming but the lightning, it can be pretty horrifying. And then you get not only now do you have the limited visibility from the wind-driven rain, it's night. And you've got 200 boats in somewhat close proximity, all trying to race to the island. And now, they're trying to manage the pandemonium of 50, 60, 70 knots of wind. And how do you convey that and provide the details that they need to make a decision about, whether they should continue racing or not, or a course to take perhaps to, limit their risk, without adding the emotion of, hey guys, I really don't think that you should do this because it's not my job, to tell them, whether they should race the race or not. So being somewhat dispassionate. And so I kind of, typically my briefings are all done, verbal or in writing, with, supporting graphics. But I decided I really could not convey the nature of the risk there. So I actually provided a video briefing and showed, all the forecast data that backed up, what I was proposing, so that they knew that I wasn't, kind of exaggerating, the potential. It ended up being about, I think 3 of my 15 clients decided not to race. Mm-hmm. That, it was just simply too frightening. The potential for damage to the boat or somebody on the crew getting hurt was just too great. Mm-hmm. And so they decided to sit the race out, this is the first time I've ever had anyone, withdraw before the race based on the forecast.
Yeah. We know that old expression, when in doubt, don't go out, but it doesn't necessarily apply to sailboat racers. They're like, we've spent a lot of money to get the boat here and to get this crew here, and we are racing. But the reason I called Mark to invite him on the program was that David, in starting his article about it, had said, Mark Thornton was, and this is before David knew, I think that we had a relationship with you, Mark.
Right.
And he said, this very smart weather forecaster kind of presented a pretty heavy situation to us, and we made the crazy choice to go.
I know.
To explain just how very difficult and crazy it was that they went, and we're really grateful to have survived it, and the boat survived it and all of that. But
well, the interesting thing about that boat was that in a previous, I don't think it was the year before, it was 2 or 3 years before, they were also a customer, and there was a very unusual thunderstorm in the middle of the night. I certainly didn't forecast it, and it wasn't in the forecast. Kind of popped up, produced some really high winds, and one of the crew members from that boat went overboard in the middle of the night. I'm pretty sure they had their life jacket on, and they were in the water for an hour.
Yeah.
While the boat searched for them, and it ended up being, he had a whistle, and he just kept blowing the whistle, and eventually the boat heard him and scooped him out of the water.
Yeah.
And so then just a couple years later, to head off on that race, so the same crew member was on board.
Yeah.
With that daunting forecast, that took a lot of guts to do that.
Yeah. Well, they I know that particular crew, and they travel with a little bit, but he did have a life jacket on. It wasn't zipped, so it was. He learned it was very challenging to get it, and so and his light wasn't working on it. So that's why they had to find him with the whistle. It was he said that $2 whistle saved his life, right. And but they have a lot more personal safety devices on their bodies now, and
I think, Molly, that I think he was off watch, and I think they were trying to get the main or something down, and then they called in all hands.
Yeah.
And so then he was coming up deck very quickly from being asleep and was trying to get ready at the same time, he was coming up. And so it wasn't like he wasn't strolling around on
He
deck.
went sliding through that open transom thing. If
Right.
I'm remembering the story correctly, they very bravely told that tale on the stage at Safety at Sea seminar at the Naval Academy, and it was the first time they'd talked about it publicly. And it was. I happened to be there to listen to it. It was really a pretty incredible story, and it was an incredible reminder how zipping up your life jacket before you get up on deck, how important it would be to have an AIS system on your boat, to have a PLB on your body. And for anyone who hasn't read the January issue of SpinSheet, there's a very good update on the latest technology for AIS and personal locator beacons or personal EPIRBs. So go check it out. Was that Chicago Mac? Was that the most extreme situation you've ever had where you were advising your race clients?
Yeah, there have been years where there have been bigger winds, like northerlies at 35 or 40 on Lake Michigan. So that it presents a risk to the boat, but it's that's a risk that's a little more easily managed.
Mm-hmm.
You can reef down, you can bear off a little bit, versus kind of the unknowns of a squall line, particularly 2 squall lines that we're going to be, traveling in close proximity. By far, that was and of course, you can't kind of help, but it was a very unsettled day then for the rest of me. And overnight, then I'm at home. I'm not in contact with the crew. I'm not able to contact any of my customers once the race starts.
Yeah.
And I'm watching the radar, and this event is unfolding. I can see where my customers are.
Yeah.
And being really interested in wanting to reach out and go, all that stuff I told you earlier, it's happening. The storms are 2 miles away from you. I hope, or 2 hours away from you. I hope that you're ready, but you can't contact them. You just kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah.
And I'm watching on the yellow brick, that the boats are taking evasive action. The storms pass. I can still see that the boat is now coming back on course for the island, so I can relax a little bit and like, okay, everybody's got to be okay if the boat is back.
Yeah, they're continuing to race.
Yeah, it was a very difficult day.
Can you think of a time, and it doesn't have to be when you had clients, but just when you were sort of doing some forecasting, that your own forecast proved to be really wrong and you learned something from it?
Yeah, I have it's kind of, the best stories are embarrassing stories, right?
True.
So a local yacht club here in Cleveland was going to sponsor the Opti Nationals or something, I think, several years ago. And they were going to do this out on Lake Erie. So they got these little, 8-foot prams, and they got kids that are 5 to 10 years old or something. They had 40 or 50 kids out on the lake. And so I volunteered to do the weather briefings and monitor the weather during this regatta, because they needed about an hour's notice in order to get everyone in off the lake. They had to, tow these boats in long strings to get them in. And I'm like, no problem, I can do that. So we had a day where, thunderstorms were forecast. Thunderstorms were indeed occurring, at the western end of Lake Erie. So I knew I had, a fair amount of time. So I'm in contact with the race committee, telling them, you still have 3 hours or something. You can try to get some more races in. And so, I'm sitting inside the yacht club. This yacht club has a wonderful bar. So I'm sitting inside the bar, I got a table all to myself. I got my laptop. I'm watching the radar like a hawk. And I get a phone call from the race committee. And he goes, what the heck is going on over Lakewood, which is just it's like 5 miles away. It's the next suburb over. I'm like, what are you talking about, Mike? He's like, the atmosphere is blowing up over there. You're like, what the heck is going on? I'm looking at the radar, Mike, there's nothing there. And he goes, get out of the bar and go look at the sky. Like, that's a great idea. And I went outside and I looked at the sky, and here the thunderstorm was just blowing up. And I knew that in the early stages of a thunderstorm, before the thunderstorm is producing any rain, it does not appear on radar. And so I could sit there watching the radar very intently. I was never going to see that storm until it was actually producing rain.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm outside. I realize, oh, crap. We've got a problem here because this storm is going to roll over the lake in just a few minutes. There's no way they can get these kids out of the water or off the water. And this is, it's embarrassing and scary at the same time. Well, yeah, it did. It rained, it poured, everybody was fine. The kids continued racing. But from then on, when I work regattas, I sit outside under the portfolio and keep an eye on the sky. So, it was the best lessons are the ones that, the lessons you don't forget are the ones that are the embarrassing ones.
Yeah. Well, I know some friends that, we all probably every single person watching this program, we obsess about the weather in the summer because we want to go somewhere, and you don't want to not go there just because there's a possibility of a thunderstorm.
Right.
July and August, there's always a possibility of a thunderstorm. And if you don't go out every time there's a possibility, then you don't go out at all. So
Right.
Sometimes you just sort of have to boldly and maybe stupidly go out. So it does help to have some weather forecasting skills to know that you're not going out in a tornado,
Right.
or you're not going out maybe at 3:30 when there's a giant blob on the radar coming right at you.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes when there's just a possibility, sometimes it's worth it just to go out on the boat and poke around and look at the sky and see what's happening before you turn around and go in and call it a day. But
Right.
I'd love to hear some other people's stories about that. You guys can always email me your storm stories at molly@spinsheet.com.
With pictures. We need pictures.
Yes, absolutely. We always need pictures. So, and by the way, I have a great folder of storm pictures. And when I was asking you for an image for the webinar, I wanted people to be clear about the fact that it wasn't only about thunderstorms, because we have
Right.
done your thunderstorm webinar a couple years in a row. I wanted people to know that this is a broader seminar, that even if you've taken the thunderstorm webinar, you could get something out of just the Marine Weather 101. So,
Right. Absolutely.
what do you wish, based on your now, 10 years of experience at this, what do you wish more sailors knew about weather forecasting?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to one of the common questions that we talked about, a few minutes ago. And that is that people think that the forecasting is too hard to comprehend. And so maybe they don't spend enough time reading or trying to learn about it. And it's so fundamental to, sailing and being safe on the water, or being, a really good racer. You'll do a lot better racing if you become a really good weather forecaster. But people seem to, a lot of folks have a mental block about trying to learn it because they think that it's going to be, too hard or too confusing. And if they could let that go, I think they'd be surprised at how much they could learn very quickly, and it would fundamentally change their, ability to forecast and feel comfortable on the water.
Alicia, who is, and I'm sorry, Alicia, I'm just not completely sure whether you pronounce your name Alicia or Alicia, and I have friends who pronounce it both different ways. But anyway, Captain Tyrell is asking us a question. She wants to know about midsummer on the Chesapeake, where often there's, 0 gusting to 1 knot of breeze on the bay. Any advice to see those low wind speeds?
Ooh,
Predictive is probably what she's looking for.
Yeah, that is probably the $64,000 question. When summer really kind of reaches its peak and you get those really, dreadfully hot days, there's typically a huge dome of high pressure over the East Coast. And so you have very low, what's called a pressure gradient. So the change in barometric pressure, is very small. And so there's not a really good driver, a large scale driver of wind. And so then on those days, you're kind of left with trying to forecast the light sea breezes or the little bit of zephyrs that form from very modest changes in barometric pressure, where you have maybe a little bit of cooler water out over the lake and a little bit of warm spot over the land. And so you get this tiny little bit of air going. And that is so transient and it's so small scale that the forecast models, it's almost impossible for the forecast models to sort of pick up on those features. So I don't know that I would go so far as to say they are impossible to forecast, but it's very close to impossible to forecast, exactly where those, 1 or 2 knots of breeze is going to form, where it's 100 yards away. Very, very challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where you need to bring out some of your kind of like the rain dance, the wind dance.
Right.
Bring out some of the superstitious tools that you can use, and either that or you buy a trawler.
There's always that option.
We just so you guys know, we have another magazine called Prop Talk. If you do go over to the other side there, we still have things for you to read. But and I know that Alicia does. She does just about anything when it comes to boats, but she does love to sail. And Betty Caffo, thanks for tuning in, Betty. She's a regular on SpinSheet Happy Hour. She said, "We see the hideous dark clouds from Rock Hall sailing south. I say we should just turn around and go back north and sit it out. Alas, as we head back north, another cell appears and we get doused anyway." So Mark's comment to actually look at the sky is wise. And she said,
Right.
"Sorry, no photos, too ugly." It's never too ugly to take a photo, Betty. Unless you're holding on for dear life, in which case I would say do not take a photo. So we made it to last call here. If there are any last questions, go ahead and post your question now. But why don't you just give us, Mark, a little summary of your webinar in March, and then
Sure.
we will tell people how they can sign up.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a 3-part webinar, Marine Weather 101, focusing specifically on the Chesapeake Bay. And so it's designed for really anyone who spends time on the water, whether you are a paddler, a sailor, a powerboater, fisherman, it doesn't matter, or like even just spending, time near the bay. And we're going to cover the basics of reading weather maps, wind and wave forecasting, talk about thunderstorms, learn a little bit about Doppler weather radar and how to manage a thunderstorm event, and cover kind of the basics of how to write your own weather forecast and where to find some of maybe the most accurate and latest forecast resources.
There is an easier link where you can get to Mark's page, and that is spinsheet.com/marine-weather-webinar. Marine Weather Webinar. SpinSheet.com, Marine Weather Webinar. And it will take you to the registration page. Or you can also go to SpinSheet.com, go to our calendar, look to March 6th, and click on the link, and it will also take you to the registration page. Or if you have trouble finding that, you can always email me at molly@spinsheet.com and I'll send it to you. But you have plenty of time to sign up for it. We're not going to cap it, I don't think, at any number. And and it's going to be March 6th, March 13th, and March 20th. And if you miss one, that's okay, right, Mark?
Right. All of the sessions are recorded. And so anyone that registers will be able to also have access to those recordings. They're usually available the next day after the live presentation. And then we're going to leave those recordings up until, I think, July 1.
Okay.
So you'll have plenty of time to, watch the materials now. Excuse me. Watch those materials now and then again before boating season. So the recordings are available to anyone who registers.
Great. And we have one last question from Tim Mangus, and Tim will answer your question because you're so generous with your awesome videos and photos. And we thank you for that and for keeping us posted on the log canoes over the course of the summer. Tim's question, how far into the future, how many days is a forecast reliable?
So it clearly decreases over time. In the 1 to 3 day category, its forecast is pretty good. 4 to 5 days, starts to diminish, and then kind of beyond 6 or 7 days, you can have some confidence in the large scale weather pattern, where the highs and lows are, but sort of a fairly low confidence level in the specifics of like wind and wave forecasts and things like that. So really the forecast models are getting, all of them, are getting pretty good. And, the arguments that are out there about, that the Euro model is better than the National Weather Service model or something. They're talking about, less than a percentage difference in accuracy. The accuracy is up in the mid to upper 90s, on a lot of the parameters. The models are doing a great job, particularly in the short term, and getting better.
Well, great, Mark. It's been so nice to have you back on the program. I always learn something from you, and I'm looking forward to the webinar. I'm around. I'm going to attend this time. And Sharb, are you there? Are you going to come back?
Of course I'm coming back.
There you are. Well, I don't know. I thought maybe you got into some of that 57%,
I unfortunately don't have any of that. It was news to me that was even available, but I did get a message that we should just request a bottle, and so we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's anything.
I think it would be one of those like, go night night, Molly. I won't
Yeah,
be long enough. That would be one way to get rid of me.
Well, Mark, I do want to thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Full disclosure about the seminar, SpinSheet does get a bit of a commission out of that, but everything we give you is free, and the seminar is $80 for all 3 sessions, so it's a great deal. If you want to take the next step, that's the best way to do it.
And also, we should just let them know if you want to go to Mark's website and just learn more about Mark and what he does. So, Mark, will you tell us what your website is without the extra stuff?
Yeah, www.LakeErieWX.com.
Great.
See, I didn't know there was a simpler SpinSheet link. You didn't mention.
Well, I didn't provide it for you. That's a problem. Yeah, we just came up with it. It's in the new ad that's coming up in the February issue. But
Okay.
I'm the only one who's seen it of this group. So
very good. Well,
anyway.
and that link will work too. You just got to dig for the SpinSheet side.
Yeah, you do.
Well,
Mark, you're going to Florida this week, right?
Next Friday.
All right.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Well, good. Are you going to get some snow there in Cleveland before then? Is that likely?
Yeah, we already have it. We got a little bit a couple of days ago.
Ooh.
So, and it's cold. It was 22 degrees when we walked the dog this morning. So it's time to go south.
Well, it is January after all. So
right.
Well,
right.
good. Well, have a safe trip and stay in touch. And we're looking forward to seeing you again on March 6th. Thanks everybody for joining the SpinSheet Happy Hour. We look forward to seeing. Red hat photo of the month. Thank you, Cheryl. One of us forgets that every time, and that's actually a cool picture. That's my friend Stephen Toole, and he is the skipper of a boat called Hot Pepper. You've probably seen out on the race course before. I forget exactly. It's a J42, I think. Anyway, it's a cool picture. And he usually has a big smile on his face. He's got his game face on for that one. So anyway, great picture of Stephen. We love that he's wearing a life jacket. And thank you. Thank you, Shar, for remembering that. I would have been in big trouble for forgetting it. And
you know it.
Thanks, everybody. Well, everybody have a great, safe weekend. And we'll see you next time, the SpinSheet Happy Hour, the first Friday of February. And we'll be there.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
Bye,
see you, everybody.
Bye.